Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Nash, Professor Kate Nash from the Department of Sociology at Goldsmiths, University of London. I'm very happy to talk to you today about political sociology and human rights and how to make human rights more than just ideals, what we can learn from political sociology about realizing human rights. I've written a couple of books on this, and it's a topic that's very dear to my heart. So I'm very happy to have been invited, and thank you for listening to me. I'm going to address this question of what we can learn from political sociology about human rights through an example that is currently very live in the UK. One of the points that I want to make is that to understand what makes human rights possible, we must look at the specificity of the context in which demands for human rights are being made. As we all know, human rights are universal in principle and widely disregarded, abused, and violated in practice. To understand what human rights can do to improve people's lives and move us a little closer to our ideals of justice, it's necessary to understand demands for human rights in specific historic and geographical contexts. The context I know best is the UK, and it's a context that is changing quite radically at the moment. In this lecture, I will present theoretical and methodological tools that I've developed, especially in the cultural politics of human rights and the political sociology of human rights, and in particular, the concept of cultural politics and of the human rights field and its subfields, juridical, governmental, activist, and the mediated public. The example I'm going to use to illustrate how these tools are useful is, as I say, from the UK. There are many similarities between Brazil and the UK that make the example relevant, I hope, and the tools useful in terms of the legal system, the structure of government, the role of NGOs, and so on. And of course, most strikingly today, there are similarities in terms of national populist rhetoric and policies too. Of course, there are also differences between Brazil and the UK. I don't know Brazil well enough to make the comparison with a similar example that is live in Brazil, and I'm therefore leaving it up to you to think about how you might use the tools to study a human rights case that is important to you. And that might also involve, of course, adapting or supplementing these tools. So the example I'm going to talk about is the case of Shamima Begum, which I'm calling a human rights controversy, and I'll explain what that means. Shamima Begum is a young woman living in a refugee camp in northern Syria. She is far from her parents and her sisters and brothers. Her husband is dead, and so are the 3 babies to which she has given birth. Shamima Begum is a member of ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. She left the UK aged 15 to go and join the Sunni Muslim terrorist group in Syria. 10 days later, she married an ISIS fighter in Syria, a Dutch citizen. ISIS became known all around the world for its human rights atrocities. They seek publicity and recruits by uploading films showing people, including aid workers and journalists, being beheaded by ISIS fighters for the cameras. They have massacred tens of thousands of civilians in Syria and Iraq and forced the displacement of tens of thousands more. They've raped thousands of women as a weapon of war, and they've tried to wipe out the Yazidi people altogether, the crime of genocide. Shamima Begum is stateless. She has no citizenship anywhere. In February 2019, a journalist found Shamima in a refugee camp in northern Syria. She was 20 years old and pregnant. In an interview widely shown on TV in the UK, Shamima said she wanted to return to the UK. In the interview, she was asked about a suicide bomb terrorist attack that took place at a pop concert in the UK in 2017, in which 23 people died and 139 people were injured, half of them teenagers. She said it was not right that innocent people should suffer, but that ISIS saw such acts as justified because of the bombing of ISIS-held areas in Syria and Iraq. The day after the interview, the UK government announced that it was taking away Shamima's citizenship, saying that she would never be allowed to come back to Britain, where she was born and grew up. A few days later, Shamima's baby son was born and died because of conditions in the camp. What is the role of human rights in this case? Immediately, as soon as the Home Secretary removed Shamima Begum's citizenship, lawyers brought a case against the government. They did so on the grounds that she had been made stateless, which is illegal in UK law and in international human rights law. A preliminary hearing was heard by the Special Immigration Appeals Commission in London in February 2020. The commission was specially set up in 1997 and was very important following 9/11 during the War on Terror. It hears appeals against government decisions that are considered sensitive in terms of security and that concern people who are not British citizens but who are resident in the UK. It is a court that is somewhat separate from the national court system. The cases are heard in semi-secret for reasons of national security. Some evidence is not disclosed to the plaintiff, their lawyer, or the public. SIAC, as the Special Immigrations Appeals Commission is known, decided that the Home Secretary had not acted unlawfully in taking her citizenship away from Shamima Begum. They decided it was not unlawful because she is legally entitled to Bangladeshi citizenship. In Bangladeshi law, because Shamima's parents are Bangladeshi citizens, she can also become a Bangladeshi citizen. Shamima has never been to Bangladesh and she does not speak Bengali. As soon as the UK government took away her British citizenship, the Bangladeshi government said that it would never grant her citizenship, nor allow her to enter the country. Back in the UK, SIAC also said that European human rights law does not apply in Shamima Begum's case, because where she is living in Syria is not under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. SIAC judges did allow Shamima to appeal against the government's decision to remove her citizenship on the grounds that Shamima has not been able to represent her case properly in court since she is living in the camp in northern Syria, and it is very difficult for the lawyers representing her to communicate with her. However, the judges said they are confident that the UK government has not broken the law in depriving her of citizenship. In 2020, the Court of Appeal ruled that she must be allowed to return to the UK to have her case properly heard. In 2021, the case is due to be heard in the Supreme Court. The government is arguing that she cannot be allowed to enter the UK for reasons of public security. I've chosen to talk about the controversy over Shamima Begum's case because it illustrates, I think, quite well the themes that I'm going to talk about today. How do we understand what human rights are and what they can do? So the first topic that I want to speak to here is human rights before the law. Human rights beyond the law. In the controversy over Shamima Begum, it is very clear what human rights are, that what human rights are and what they can do goes far beyond the law. In fact, in this case, as in others, law may actually be an obstacle to realizing the spirit of human rights in practice. Surely, depriving someone of citizenship is a violation of human rights, even if technically, in the case of Shamima Begum, it may not be illegal. In fact, one of the things that makes the case so shocking is that Jews had their German citizenship taken away legally by the Nuremberg laws of 1935 before they were deported to the concentration camps to be exterminated as a people. Only those of German blood, and even within that category, only those who served the Reich, could be citizens. Others were state subjects. That was their legal status. So the Nuremberg trials were racial. Citizenship was removed from people the state wanted to kill, Jews and also Romani. and the Nuremberg laws were also explicitly political. Citizenship could be removed from opponents of the Nazi regime. If, as it is often said, human rights must be respected above all else because of what happened in Nazi Germany, it is surely a very serious problem and a very serious violation of human rights to remove citizenship from someone who belongs to a minority group in society. The right to citizenship is surely one of the very bases on which the never again of human rights is built. Arbitrarily depriving a person of citizenship, making them stateless, is indeed a violation of human rights in international human rights law. Most notably the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15. 1. Everyone has the right to a nationality. 2. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Now, clearly, as ever, arbitrarily in this article carries a lot of weight and needs interpretation. In fact, there are a number of UN conventions that deal specifically with statelessness and citizenship, to which states have signed up and which they have incorporated into national law, and a number of UN reports and resolutions that follow also. The UK, for example, has signed and ratified the UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness in 1961, though it did reserve the right to make individuals stateless for the vital interests of Her Britannic Majesty, in other words, the state. So it seems likely that it is indeed legal for the UK to remove Shamima Begum's British citizenship for the vital interests of the British state. And it also seems that it is an abuse of the spirit of human rights, since it effectively leaves her stateless, and we know the significance of removing the citizenship of an unpopular minority historically, what it led to in the case of Nazi Germany, for example. So, if law is not all that's involved in controversies over claims for human rights, even if law is always involved, what happens in such cases? I suggest that it is useful to think of human rights as creating controversies. They are controversies involving the cultural politics that take place in different spaces across a field of human rights. Cultural politics and field of human rights are theoretical and methodological terms to help us study the complexity of human rights demands in specific cases. To understand human rights controversies beyond their legal dimensions, we turn to sociology. We need to understand the social conditions in which demands for human rights are made, and to be able to trace what happens to them once they are made. Who decides what human rights are and what they should be? What kinds of organizations and what kinds of authority make particular demands effective? And why do human rights demands so often fail? So now I turn to the question of cultural politics. What is cultural politics? Cultural politics, and I'm taking the definition here from the Cultural Politics of Human Rights, from my book, The Cultural Politics of Human Rights. Cultural politics involves more or less organized struggles over symbols that frame what issues and events mean to social actors who are emotionally and intellectually invested in shared understandings of the world. So just a note on what cultural politics is not. Here we're not thinking of culture in the sense of high culture, art, theatre, literature, and so on, nor popular culture, TV, cinema, media. That's not the meaning of culture that's at work here, although the meaning of culture that's at work includes those domains also. Culture, in the definition of cultural politics, is everyday life, shared understandings of facts and values that enable us to communicate with each other, a common language. What words mean historically, how they shape what we see, how we think, how we feel, and not only words. In fact, increasingly in our societies, culture involves images and things also, objects that are made or found, designed or historic, desired, celebrated, reviled. So culture is very broad in this definition of cultural politics. Politics is also very broad. Politics in cultural politics is politics with a small p, compared to politics with a large P, which involves lobbying, party politics, policy making in and around governments. In contrast, politics with a small p concerns the very sense of who we are as a people, who belongs together in an institution, and who therefore can also be excluded, whether it's a university or a nation state, or a home indeed, a domestic space. So it concerns the who are we that belong together and who cannot be allowed to be included. It also includes these very deep and general questions about what is known and how is it known, and questions about what are the most important values of our common life and how do we decide. So politics with a small p concerns the fundamental questions of what holds us together as a society. So once again, this definition of cultural politics. Cultural politics involves more or less organized struggles over symbols that frame what issues and events mean to social actors who are emotionally and intellectually invested in shared understandings of the world. So it involves struggles, competition over who decides what are the facts and values at stake in a particular controversy, over symbols that are a kind of shorthand for what matters. Symbols that really matter to those involved, emotionally and intellectually. The cultural politics of human rights involves creating controversies and working through them to establish who we are and how we are to live together. In terms of the Shamima Begum case, we can ask, what does the case of Shamima Begum symbolize? What does Shamima Begum mean as a symbol to different actors engaged in contesting the facts and values of human rights? As you can see already from my presentation of this controversy, there are many possible facts and values that Shamima Begum symbolizes: vulnerable young woman, terrorist, refugee, plaintiff, British citizen, foreigner, victim, grieving mother, human being, and so on. Some of these meanings are expressed in the relatively few images that circulate of Shamima, especially the one of her that is very widely used in a black burqa and the other as a schoolgirl. And I've included those on your on the transcript of this talk, just so that you can get an idea. So moving on then, we also need to think about what is the human rights field. And here again, I'm using a definition that comes from the book, from my book, The Cultural Politics of Human Rights. And I draw here on the work of Pierre Bourdieu, the famous French sociologist. So according to Bourdieu, a field is a set of regularized social interactions in which the value of what is at stake is shared, and there is competition between participants who are structurally located in relation to each other. So the point here really is that cultural politics is not free-floating. It takes place in, it's affected by, and in turn it affects the institutions which constrain actors who are engaged in cultural politics. The actors involved in cultural politics in the human rights field share the value of deciding, do human rights matter in a particular controversy? Because there are other values in society over which cultural politics is engaged. So one question is, are human rights the most important value here? Do they matter here? And then what counts as a human right in this case, and whose human rights are at stake? Who is entitled, and to what? Now, the human rights field is diverse. It's not just in one place. It's not just one set of institutions. In the controversy over Shamima Begum's case, as in others that take place largely in the domestic sphere of a national state, which is most human rights controversies, in fact, there are four important domains in the field of human rights. Actors in the human rights field are structurally located in different ways in relation to each other. For the moment, I want to stay with the example so that you can see the value of these concepts and these methodological tools concretely. So I'm going to stay with the controversy over Shamima Begum. In this controversy over Shamima Begum's case, we can see the interplay of four institutionally based subfields, through each of which people are engaged in trying to establish the facts of Shamima Begum. What does this case involve factually? And also the consequences then for the value of human rights. They are competing to decide what human rights are in this controversy, whether they matter more or less than public security, which is the other overarching value at stake here. They are engaged in the cultural politics of human rights. So we begin with the juridical subfield. The first subfield, always important in controversies over human rights, which invariably involve courts, is the juridical subfield. Within this subfield, there is competition to determine what existing law says and how it is to be interpreted and applied. It is a competition for legal authority centered on courts. Now, as we know, any interpretation of the law is underdetermined by legal doctrine to a greater or lesser extent in different cases. Underdetermined in terms of legal doctrine means that there is a lot of room for different interpretations of law, each of which could be considered correct according to what is encoded in written law. In human rights cases, interpretations are generally quite open. It is high-level constitutional principles that are at stake, not routine administration. Different interpretations are closed down. The law is established, however temporarily, when a definitive decision is made by a qualified judge. The role of lawyers, and in some systems of law professors, is to try to influence judges to use their position to make a particular interpretation of the law that will not hold just for the case that's in court, but for other cases too. Shamima Begum was represented in the case that was brought to SIAC against the government's removal of her citizenship by a famous lawyer in the UK called Gareth Peirce. Gareth Peirce has been the main advocate in numerous high-profile cases, including those concerning terrorist suspects detained without trial in the UK and in Guantanamo Bay. Shamima Begum's lawyer argued that the government's actions were illegal for three main reasons. Firstly, she was left stateless because of the removal of her British citizenship. Secondly, she was not able to defend herself against the decision because she was in the refugee camp in northern Syria. And thirdly, if she went to Bangladesh secretly, and the Bangladeshi government has said it will not let her enter, she would be hanged. So effectively, the government is subjecting her to cruel and inhumane punishment. The judges in SIAC are competing with the government to have the last say in what counts as the facts and values in the Shamima Begum controversy. Here, the competition leads them declaring the government to have acted legally. They support the government using the resources they have, their authority to decide what counts as law. In the press release, after SIAC judges heard the case, they announced and justified the decision that Shamima Begum could appeal the government's removal of her citizenship, but that it would be very unlikely to succeed. They stated that Shamima Begum had a legal right to Bangladeshi citizenship, regardless of what the Bangladeshi government now said. Therefore, the UK government had not acted illegally in removing her British citizenship because the decision had not made her stateless, which is illegal in UK law. We now move on to the governmental subfield. Now, in fact, while they are treating Shamima Begum's Bangladeshi citizenship as a right, the UK government is effectively treating her British citizenship as a privilege. Just a few days before SIAC's ruling, in fact, the newly appointed Attorney General, which is the Office of the Chief Legal Advisor to the government, who was called Suella Braverman, and who is also British Asian and born to immigrant parents, asked in the Houses of Parliament whether the Home Secretary could confirm that British citizenship is a privilege, not a right, something the Home Secretary was very happy to do. It is, of course, very common that judges support governments where human rights are concerned. And within the governmental subfield, human rights are very often problematic, especially where, as in the controversy over Shamima Begum's case, human rights are being demanded for unpopular minorities. The governmental subfield is characterized by competition over popular authority, the claim to really represent the people, the voters. It is competition between those who have official state roles. In the UK, that's the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister, and so on. Ultimately, the stake of any controversy for these officials are their political careers as high-ranking politicians and the re-election of the government within which they are high-ranking politicians. And it's on the basis of the democratic election of the government that state officials claim popular authority, the authority to make final decisions concerning human rights in the name of the people. At the beginning of the Shamima Begum controversy, the Home Secretary at the time was Sajid Javid, the first British Asian person to hold one of these high offices of state, and the Conservative Party was in government. The Conservative Party in the UK is traditionally the party of law and order. In Sajid Javid, we see a man brought up in a Pakistani immigrant family removing the British citizenship of a young woman brought up in a Bangladeshi immigrant family. We don't know Javid's personal motives, but there surely is an important symbolism at work, a response to the question that is continuously raised in the UK and actually in many countries in the world: what does it mean to be a Muslim today? In the UK government's construction of human rights in the Shamima Begum controversy, the good, law-abiding Muslim committed to British values on one side is opposed to the bad terrorist Muslim who can be expelled from Britain on the other. For the government, what Shamima Begum represents symbolically is the opportunity to underline that for some people, British citizenship is a privilege, not a right, and that what ministers in the government value above all is the security of the public, far above universal human rights, especially where bad immigrants are concerned. Governmental authority in this case is based on the construction of popular authority. We who represent the people, the British people, which includes some good Muslims, not just because we, the government, are elected, but because we protect you, the people, against our enemies. The activist subfield. The third subfield in human rights controversies is that of activism, NGOs, social movements. This field is very varied, from grassroots activists through to international NGOs like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. It also overlaps with activist lawyers like Gareth Peirce, and sometimes with state officials who oppose or disagree with government policies inside Parliament, inside government sometimes. The range of types of authority that are claimed by actors engaged in cultural politics out of the activist subfield is also very wide. Sometimes what activists claim is legal authority, interpretations of law that are at odds with established interpretations. Sometimes what they claim is popular authority. Sometimes activists claim that people are not being represented in dominant discourse. In claiming popular authority, activists are showing that people who are stigmatized, like the poor or minorities, immigrants, people who are stigmatized, individuals who belong to groups whose rights can easily be overlooked, whose rights can be ignored, are actually part of the people. They have rights that should be respected. Very often what activists claim is moral authority. They put forward interpretations of human rights values that show what is the right thing to do in a particular case. It is in the claims for moral authority that we are most likely to see reference to the universality of human rights, to what they mean for humanity, and what it is to treat human beings with consideration and respect. It is noticeable that the activist subfield has not been very active in the Shamima Begum case, in the Shamima Begum controversy. Shamima Begum has generally not become a symbol of the human rights of stigmatized people for human rights activists. There are two types of human rights activist groups that we might expect to stand up for Shamima Begum's rights. The first is NGOs concerned with human rights in the UK. The most famous of these is the civil liberties organisation Liberty. Liberty has often made claims to legal and moral authority with regard to the rights of terrorist suspects in the UK. It has not energetically taken up Shamima Begum's cause. In a press release after the SIAC judges reached their conclusion, the response was actually very subdued and quiet. It was, "The government has an array of powers to deal with people suspected of involvement in terrorism. Taking away a person's citizenship, one of the most serious amongst them, and must not be wielded lightly." What is notable here is how this response stays within the terms of the established legal framework. It is possible to remove a person's British citizenship. Sometimes it may be necessary, but this should be done with care. It is especially striking because Shamima Begum is very far from the first person whose British citizenship the government has removed. In fact, it is a growing trend. Since 2010, more than 150 people have had their citizenship removed, with 104 of those in 2017 alone. The only grounds that the government has given is that British citizenship in these cases was not conducive to the public good. But the facts about this growing trend are not something you will learn from Liberty's response to the Shamima Begum controversy. The other kind of organisation we might expect to defend Shamima Begum's human rights is those that represent Muslims in Britain. These organisations did come out in defence of her rights. CAGE is quite well known in the UK as a radical activist organisation. It calls itself Grassroots. It came to prominence to defend the rights of terrorist suspects following 9/11, and Moazzam Begg, a former detainee in Guantanamo Bay, is publicly associated with the organisation. CAGE claims popular authority above all. As a Muslim, Shamima Begum should be treated in ways that are consistent with British law and also with Muslim values. CAGE argued that Shamima Begum should be allowed to return to the UK, where, if she is charged with terrorist offences, she should be given a fair trial and then counselling by the Muslim community. The other, more mainstream and more prominent organisation representing Muslims is the Muslim Council of Britain, which also stated that she should be allowed to return to face trial. The Muslim Council of Britain made the point that taking away Shamima Begum's citizenship would, and I quote, send a chill down the spine of not just British Muslim communities, but also all Britons whose parents come from immigrant backgrounds. The Home Secretary's decision amplifies fears of a two-tier citizenship system, sets a dangerous precedent, and demonstrates an abdication of responsibility. Here, the Muslim Council of Britain, quite mildly, is claiming both political and moral authority. Politically, British citizens must be treated as equal. British Muslims are not being properly represented by their government. Morally, creating a two-tier system in which for some British citizenship is a right, while for others it is a privilege, is a racist policy that is wrong in principle and dangerous in practice. Finally, in terms of subfields of the human rights field, we have the mediated public. This is perhaps the most important domain in the subfield of human rights, and it's also the most complex of all. In fact, it is a kind of meta field. It is where all of the actors involved in the cultural politics of human rights engage in trying to win the authority to define what matters in human rights cases. All actors in the human rights field compete in the mediated public for the authority to define both the value of human in a particular case and what counts as important facts in a particular controversy too. Judges and lawyers from the juridical subfield participate in the mediated public. Though the law is supposed to stand above politics, and although we cannot know to what extent judges are influenced by what appears in the media, we do know that they try to make use of their legal authority in the mediated public. In the Shamima Begum controversy, immediately after SIAC's decision to support the government, and long before there was any chance to see a law report, the judges in the case put out a press release. They did not just state their decision, they also justified it to the public, saying that the government's removal of Shamima Begum's citizenship did not legally leave her stateless. In addition, they also added some extra legal comments, intended surely to put anyone off from expecting that Shamima Begum's appeal might be successful, with the statement that although they allowed an appeal, they are sure that the government did not act unlawfully in this case. Actors in the governmental subfield are, of course, very much oriented towards how they are represented in the media. They also make use of their influence over what appears in the mediated public to gain popular authority. In the Shamima Begum controversy, the symbolism of Sajid Javid's actions as a British Muslim only works if we know something about him and his family. Above all, in terrorist cases, governments do not want to be found on the wrong side. When the next terrorist attack happens in the UK, they do not want to be accused of putting the public in danger. Activists and NGOs also use press releases to argue their case. They rarely get a chance to go to court, and although they do lobby government directly, meeting with ministers, engaging in protests, campaigns, sometimes even direct action, it is through the media that they will get the most attention and potentially the most leverage on making changes to law and public policy. They can also get more supporters there too. So it is interesting that the head of policy and campaigns at Liberty, Grace Bradley, who wrote the very restrained press release that I quoted earlier on the SIAC judgment in Shamima Begum's case, also wrote a couple of days later an article for Vice. Vice is a massive online media and broadcasting company, founded originally in the 1990s to cover the leisure culture of young people, music, drugs, which was not being covered in the mainstream media. It is now much wider, making documentaries and covering news stories. And it's quite a source for young people to get news and to see documentaries. In Vice, in a section entitled Views My Own, so a personal opinion section, Grace Bradley wrote very strongly and emotively that it is not clear that Sajid Javid has acted lawfully in this case, and that in itself is a serious problem. It's a breach of international human rights law to make someone stateless. It's a reactionary and premature decision that appears to have been a classic case of posturing to the public gallery. However, following a more cynical interpretation, this of course sets him up for an arduous battle through the courts, in which he can cast himself as the protector of the British public and vilify any lawyer who stands in his way. In the meantime, the future a newborn baby and his mother will hang in the balance, and principles that protect us all from government excesses, like due process and the rule of law, risk being further dragged through the mud and eroded. In addition, she argued, as the discriminatory underbelly of our citizenship laws is brought to light, driving people to affirm Shamima's Britishness and that of all children of immigrants born here, it's vital that we don't normalise the idea that it is only her Britishness that entitles her to due process. Executive, extrajudicial responses to allegations of serious crime shouldn't be tolerated for anyone, whatever their nationality. We know what ultimately happens when governments tell us they have to make exceptions in the names of fighting terrorism, complicity in torture, extraordinary rendition, secret prisons, summary executions, and indefinite states of emergency. So Grace Bradley here is making a very powerful moral argument for universal human rights, rights for everyone, regardless of their citizenship. It is a moral argument for the due process of law to proceed and for a fair trial for anyone accused of terrorist offences. Here, Grace Bradley is claiming moral authority on the basis of history. Justice must be done, or it will lead to still more and potentially even worse injustices. Finally, then, in terms of the mediated public, it is important to note that the media, even if it is a meta field, is very far from neutral, and it is certainly not democratic. The media is a kind of public sphere, a symbolic space in which controversies can be argued over from different perspectives, a place where subfields come together. And historically, the media has been structured as a fourth estate, which is meant to hold power, especially the national government, to account. This is why censorship is so serious. Even if the function of the media as a fourth estate is always highly compromised by commercial interests and negotiations with state power. But editors and journalists are always concerned with newsworthiness. Editors and journalists are concerned to win audiences. They must be heard or there is little point to their work. There is always a tendency then to take an angle on stories that is sensationalist and that fuels and feeds existing prejudices. Moreover, where human rights controversies are concerned, journalists rarely have the expertise to go in depth into the background of the accusations, the legal dimensions of the rights claimed, the history of violations, and so on. They therefore tend to rely on spokespeople from government and court press releases, and occasionally on what is said or published by activists. Right-wing newspapers in the UK have been running an anti-human rights campaign for over 2 decades now, since the European Convention on Human Rights was incorporated into UK law by the Labour government in 1998. They have been building audiences through racist constructions of the enemy within. Foreign criminals, migrants and terrorists are taking advantage of European law to infiltrate, profit from and endanger the British public, and also of the enemy without, European courts and European elites especially. And I've given you in the transcript of this talk details of a number of headlines in the Shamima Begum controversy, where you can see exactly these kind of constructions at work. The Sun, it was a very popular and populist newspaper, is saying British ISIS school girl Shamima Begum, 19, says seeing severed heads in bins didn't faze me at all, is one headline. And a more sort of quality newspaper, The Telegraph, says one headline is, "Sorry, my heartless little jihadi bride, but you made your bed and now you can lie in it." And there are also, of course, some more liberal newspapers. Well, actually, there's one really, The Guardian, The Independent, somewhat also, but it's much less has much less readership. And one of their headlines is something very much more neutral, along the lines of Shamima Begum loses first stage of appeal against citizenship removal. And there are also some headlines and some stories which do champion Shamima Begum's human rights, although none of them take the emotional tone of Grace Bradley's argument, and none of them actually talk about human rights, but they are about rights, but they don't use the term human rights, which is interesting in the UK context. As I say, there's a kind of war against human rights going on. And one of these, for example, from The Telegraph, which I'll talk about in a moment again later, says, for example, Shamima Begum hasn't played fair, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. And this is an argument that she should be brought to back. The article that goes with that headline argues that she should be brought back to Britain and she should face trial. So the mainstream media in the UK is polarised over controversies in the human rights field, even though it's dominated by the right-wing media. The BBC representing a more sort of middle-of-the-road approach and a sort of famously, supposedly impartial approach, does not vilify human rights in the same way, and there is a certain sector of the press that is more liberal, but they are so there is another side of the British press, and the right-wing media is very strongly opposed to human rights. By far the majority of media stories are right-wing defences of the nation and the people, the honest, hard-working British people who should not be endangered by crazy foreign extremists. And of course, we know very much that social media contributes to polarisation. There is passionate defence on social media of human rights in particular cases, along the lines of Grace Bradley's argument, for example. But equally, there are expressions of hatred quite routinely that are extraordinary. And it's hard to believe that they would be made public anywhere but on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. And this is, of course, a feature of social media more generally. Social media produces polarization. On social media, we are inclined to agree with what we agree with, and we can easily avoid what we do not already know or what we disagree with. What have been called cyber bubbles are created on social media by our preferences for information and ideas that suit our already existing political and ethical commitments, and also by algorithms of which we are largely unaware. What we see on social media is polarization with no commitment to finding common ground and compromises, and actually no space at all in which to explore common ground and compromises. So I now move on to this question of national populism and human rights, which is shared by the UK and Brazil, but it will be, of course, it has a particular, there are differences in each case, but there is, I think, here a shared experience that I hope will make this example from the UK useful and interesting to you. So national populism and human rights, culture wars. Although different controversies raise different issues and require different strategies of research, there often do emerge overarching patterns that link controversies. Sometimes the battle lines are drawn very clearly. When the conflicts become very unified on either side, where there is an over-determination and a consolidation of antagonism, such that to know where someone stands on one issue is to know where they stand on a whole range of issues, we have what are sometimes called culture wars. We are in the middle of culture wars in the UK now. On the one hand, there is what are identified by their enemies, and also to some extent, if ironically sometimes, this is how we refer to ourselves as cosmopolitan, metropolitan, liberal elites. On the other side, there is what is sometimes referred to as Middle England, who see themselves as standing for patriotism, national culture, communities, and as ignored by the London elites who hold all the power, political, economic, and cultural, and who are out of touch with the rest of the country. It is from within the battle lines of antagonism, from within the culture wars, that we should understand the construction of human rights by the current UK government. Although they've been in government for over 10 years, the rhetoric of the Conservative Party in the UK is national populist. National populism was very much evident in the debate and the vote over whether the UK should leave the European Union, Brexit. To a large extent, how people voted depended on differences in age, education, and geographical location. Not having been educated at university and working in a semi-skilled or unskilled job were factors, along with being over 50 and living outside a big city, that made it more likely that an individual would vote to leave the EU. In fact, I read shortly after the vote happened that consumer tastes could be mapped onto the division over Brexit. I can't find the research now, but it said something like tea, biscuits and jam were favoured by those who voted for Brexit, while olives, wine and pâté were preferred by those who wanted to stay in the EU. It seems that anything can be a symbol in the culture wars. Human rights is, of course, very much at issue in these culture wars. The national populism of the government, as we see in the Shamima Begum case, is consistent with the long-running campaign against human rights by right-wing newspapers, which incessantly repeat stories about the freedoms and privileges allowed to foreign criminals, terrorists, and bogus asylum seekers by the judiciary, national and European. The Conservative Party has set itself against European human rights law on the ground that it interferes with national sovereignty. Right-wing media and the government construct human rights as hostile to the British people. So now, finally, can the cultural wars be won? Can rights be vernacularized? My aim in this talk has been to identify a methodology for studying the cultural politics of human rights. I hope I've given you some idea of how to study human rights beyond the law, and I'll come back to the tools I've outlined here in the conclusion. Here I just want to add some brief thoughts on how to win the culture wars around human rights. These are just some thoughts based on my research for you to think about. Sally Angle-Merry has famously argued that for human rights to be adopted in ways that make them able to address injustices, they have to be vernacularized. Vernacularization involves two elements. Firstly, human rights have to be made comprehensible to people. They have to become part of their way of life, to make sense to them in their own language, to become part of how they think on an everyday basis. Secondly, human rights must retain a critical edge. People cannot become too comfortable with the idea of human rights. They must remain challenging. They cannot be adapted too far, otherwise they will not be useful to bring about change to enable justice. So those two elements are somewhat in tension. In some of the research I have done on the cultural politics of human rights, I have found that national pride is by no means always used against human rights. On the contrary, as a symbol of national pride, human rights can be constructed as valuable in controversies to do the right thing, to show that we are a great nation. Making national pride and human rights equivalent as equally valuable is a strategy in some cases. In terms of the Shamima Begum controversy, let's look again at one of the headlines of an article in a right-wing newspaper that is arguing against removing her British citizenship. Shamima Begum hasn't played fair, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. From the Telegraph in 2019. In the article, the journalist Jenny McCartney argues that in allowing this young woman, a child when she left Britain, to rot in a refugee camp, rather than allowing her to return to a fair trial and to the support of her family, and in even celebrating her distress, and I quote, the country has lost touch with its own values. As you may or may not know, fair play is something that older, white, conservative British people, the readers of the Telegraph, take pride in. They think it is highly developed in their country, if not unique to their culture, that fairness is an especially British virtue. And other people in the world surely have good evidence for thinking differently. But in this case, nationalist rhetoric is being turned around. It can be a source of national pride to uphold the rights of a stigmatized individual. National pride demands justice even where the person demanding rights is considered as close to demonic. Of course, there is danger in such a strategy. Although national pride can be used symbolically to support human rights, at the same time, of course, there is a danger that it will feed national populism, the sense that as a nation we are superior to those who are not part of it. This is a genuine danger. We see very well that national populism is in the ascendant in many places all over the world. And what divides nationalists and cosmopolitans in the culture wars over human rights is the value of the nation as conferring rights. For national populists, only those nationals who are truly authentic insiders, the real people, are worthy of rights. Sometimes it may be possible to turn that around for some who see themselves as patriots. They may accept that the nation does have value, that it is in the value of conferring rights, and that those rights belong to all citizens. They may even be persuaded that even non-citizens should enjoy human rights under the jurisdiction of the national state. But the nation, unlike human rights, is of course inherently exclusionary. By definition, not everyone can be in the same nation. So then, if human rights are to be granted on the basis of national pride, won't there always be limits? Won't some always be outside, unworthy of human rights as such? Controversies like that of Shamima Begum are highly polarizing. In some cases, there is an absolute difference between having rights and not having them. There is no middle ground. These are hard cases. Negotiation and compromise is practically impossible. In a sense, this is what makes them so controversial. It is very hard to imagine how we might overcome a polarization of positions in such cases. What we can surely agree on, however, is how vital it is to try to find some common ground. Without it, cosmopolitans and nationalists, liberals and conservatives, drinkers of tea and eaters of olives will only become more entrenched, more defensive, more unbearable to each other. And as we clearly see happening in the UK now, the ideals of human rights will become increasingly tarnished, compromised. They will become a symbol of injustice rather than of justice. So in conclusion then, what I hope to have shown you in this lecture is how to use sociological tools to explore human rights in a specific context. As I said at the beginning, I leave it to you to think about how these theoretical and methodological tools may be useful or not to analyze a human rights controversy in Brazil. What I hope you will take away are three main points. Firstly, in order to understand what human rights are, what they mean, and how they can be used, we cannot confine our research to legal rights and legal cases. Secondly, the concept of human rights is useful as a way of addressing the importance of symbols that are embedded in wider controversies over what facts and values mean. Human rights are always political with a small p, as well as very often political with a large P. And thirdly, that the concept of the human rights field and its subfields is useful to study human rights beyond the law. In most domestic human rights controversies, by which I mean those that are not explicitly centered on international courts, the subfields are the juridical, governmental, activist, and the mediated public. The human rights field helps us identify which actors are important in a human rights controversy and how and where they mobilize arguments in order to gain legal, moral, or political authority, in order to win the definition of human rights, what they are, and how they matter in a specific case. Sometimes, as I've noted here, cultural politics harden into culture wars. We're in such a period now in many parts of the world. National populism tries to associate human rights with elitism, institutional and international. In the UK, this campaign has been successful. That's where we are today. How to combat injustices created by the rise of national populism, how to safeguard the values of human rights. These are the questions our research must address. What I hope I have done in this talk is to show you that research can only address these questions by looking beyond law and to introduce some concepts and a methodology that you will find useful to study human rights controversies in specific contexts. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for listening to this talk. I look forward to addressing your questions soon.